And so if the U.S. as a hegemon can just do what it wants to arrest and remove a leader in its kind of declared sphere of influence, what's to stop Xi Jinping from doing the same in his sphere of influence? I don't think there is broad sentiment within the senior leadership of the Trump administration for some kind of sellout of Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and so on. It takes constant, energetic, proactive, imaginative, relentless, and in some ways deferential working of the relationship, including the personal relationship between these leaders and Donald Trump.
Hello everyone and welcome back to our APARC Briefing series. My name is Kiyoteru Tsutsui and I'm the director of the Shorenstein Asia-Pacific Research Center here at Stanford University. Usually APARC Briefing focuses on Asian affairs, but something really important happened in the new year, and a lot of people are wondering what the implications of those events might be for the Indo-Pacific region. So here we are, our first episode of 2026. We'll focus on what happened in Venezuela. And for that topic, we have the privilege of having Professor Larry Diamond to talk about this. Larry doesn't really need a lot of introduction. He is the William L. Clayton Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and the Mosbacher Senior Fellow in Global Democracy at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. And he has all kinds of different titles. I'm not going to get into that too much, but I would say that he is a leading authority on democracies in the world, known as Dr. Democracy, Mr. Democracy, and his most recent book is Ill Winds, Saving Democracy from Russian Rage, Chinese Ambition, and American Complacency. Interesting, right, at the time. All right, so let's unpack what just happened and get to the first question. So on January 3rd, the United States military operation, codenamed Operation Absolute Resolve, took place, resulting in the capture of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia Flores at their residence in Caracas. And they were brought to New York and awaiting trial. In the meantime, in Caracas, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was sworn in as acting president. In the US, Trump administration, President Trump initially declared that, or suggested that the US would run, quote unquote, Venezuela. Then things are kind of in flux and we don't know exactly what the level of US engagement might be. Acting President Delcy Rodriguez initially condemned US operation, then suggested that she would cooperate with Trump administration. So she seems to be also kind of going back and forth. There's a lot of shifting grounds on both sides. So just to get to the bottom line, what is your take on what just happened and what's your observation right now?
Well, first of all, Kiyo, it's good to be with you. Thank you for having me. What's just happened is that the U.S. Has probably violated international law to intervene in forcibly in the internal affairs of Venezuela and remove its political leader, its president. I don't consider Maduro to have been a legitimate leader of Venezuela. I don't think there's any dispute about the fact that he lost the July 28, 2024 presidential election and lost it decisively to the democratic movement led by Maria Corina Machado and the unity ticket that was headed by her designate, Edmundo Gonzalez, when the Maduro regime disqualified her from running because they knew she would win the election. It is probably the case that no court of law in the United States would say that Trump acted illegally from the standpoint of U.S. law because the power of the president to intervene in this way has expanded so dramatically over time. But it's been a shocking action, I think, in world affairs. We've seen nothing like it since George Herbert Walker Bush's intervention to remove Noriega from power in Panama in the early 1990s. And it leaves open numerous questions about who is running Venezuela, what the motive was or justification for the U.S. to have done this, and as we'll talk about, what are the implications for the balance of power in the world and the potential actions of other great powers in the world, particularly China and Russia. Before we come to other regions of the world and the potential demonstration effects, Kiyo, I'd just like to make one other painful observation. Whether or not you think this U.S. action was justified and was legitimate and was respectful of international law, it created an opportunity for the U.S. to pressure a deeply authoritarian, deeply corrupt, deeply illegitimate government in Venezuela to negotiate with the democratically elected government of Maria Corina Machado some sort of transition or change. It could lead, or it could have led, to a political transition to a legitimate government in Venezuela that might have begun or might begin to reconstruct the country. And the millions of Venezuelans that were joyfully celebrating this action in Venezuela and in exile in Miami and Madrid and elsewhere in the world were celebrating not simply because Maduro, the hated dictator, was deposed, but because they thought that would be the first step toward not just a personal transition, but a regime transition. And when President Trump came before the cameras shortly after the announcement of the action on Saturday, January 3rd, and stabbed the Democratic leader of Venezuela in the back, Maria Corina Machado, by dismissing her as someone who didn't have support or respect in the country, it was a shocking moment of betrayal. And if that doesn't change, and we don't pursue a strategy of systemic change in Venezuela, all of this, in my view, will have been for naught, and it will have paid a tragic price in terms of international precedent and international legitimacy. In exchange for what? More oil flowing to the United States? More wealth flowing to Donald Trump?
So this makes the fact that Maduro was not a legitimately elected president makes this situation very difficult for someone like us to evaluate, because nobody's shedding any tears for him. But the implications, as you alluded to, for the international community, international peace, seem to be enormous. And let's get to the next question about what this means for China and Taiwan. Do you think this increased the likelihood of China taking some kind of action, or decreased? Some people argue that this actually works as some kind of deterrent for China and Xi Jinping in particular.
So there's no way at this point, days after the January 3rd intervention in 2026, that we can know the answer to that question of what it means for China's grand ambitions in Asia more generally, to be the dominant hegemon of the region, and what it means for Xi Jinping's, sworn commitment to reabsorb or conquer Taiwan and integrate it into the People's Republic of China. There are two bodies of thought. You have referred to them, I think, quite succinctly. One view is the precedent is there now, and it dates back to, as our colleague Frank Fukuyama wrote in a recent essay, it dates back to the famous phrase from Thucydides in the Peloponnesian Wars, the strong do what they will, the weak do what they must. And so if the US as a hegemon can just do what it wants to arrest and remove a leader in its kind of declared sphere of influence, what's to stop Xi Jinping from doing the same in his sphere of influence, and with a democratic system in Taiwan whose sovereignty he does not recognize? So this is something very dangerous. Now there's a difference because Taiwan has democratic legitimacy. The leader of Taiwan has political legitimacy. Lai Ching-te was democratically elected in January of 2024. And Taiwan has much stronger defenses and much greater readiness than Venezuela did. And there is the potential, even likelihood, that if the People's Republic of China were to attack Taiwan, first of all, that the US would take military action in defense of Taiwan. And second of all, the possibility, which has increased in the era of the new Japanese prime minister, that maybe Japan would join as a matter of self-defense in the defense of Taiwan. So we don't know if the question will be framed as a precedent that Xi Jinping can claim and act upon, or if Xi Jinping sees, yeah, Donald Trump is willing to use force, the American military has a lot of impressive capacity, maybe they just better hold off for a longer period of time. My answer to your question would heavily stress the following. For some years now, I think virtually the entire presidency of Xi Jinping, dating back to 2012 when he became the president and the supreme leader, the general secretary of the Communist Party of China and its paramount leader. For some time now, really pretty much a decade and a half, China has been rapidly expanding its military power and capacity, privileging those elements of expansion of its military that would be particularly useful in the strangulation and coercion or military conquest of the island of Taiwan, and ramping up in frequency, intensity, aggression, and comprehensiveness military exercises, one of which only recently was completed within the last 2 months, that could be trial runs for military action against Taiwan. And so I think the need for deterrence and the need for military vigilance, not only on the part of Taiwan, but on the part of the US, Japan, Australia, Korea, the Philippines, has never been greater. And I fear the risk of precedent and inducement to more aggressive action on the part of China, more than I am relieved that China may see some need to be deterred as a result of the US military action in Venezuela. In short, in answer to your question, I am much more fearful about the future of Taiwan today, in the week following US military action on January 3rd in Venezuela, than I was before that action.
And it probably also depends on how much military capacity the US might have to shift toward Venezuela. Depending on Venezuela's reaction, US might have to send, if not troops, some kind of Navy capacity there. And
well, one way to think about this, Kiyo, is to appreciate that the size of the United States Navy has been shrinking. The size of the Chinese Navy, the number of ships and planes and so on, has been rapidly expanding. Our capacity to build new ships is extremely limited because of the erosion of the defense industrial base in the United States. And with a limited and shrinking Navy and global obligations, the more of the Navy we deploy off the coast of Venezuela, with still significant deployments in the Mediterranean region and the Middle East, obviously the less is available to deploy as a deterrent in East Asia.
So this situation puts U.S. allies all over the world in a very difficult position. NATO leaders, NATO countries' leaders put out statements that were rather wishy-washy, non-committal. I don't know if any heads of states in Europe, Western Europe, criticized Trump directly, not that I know of. Same thing in Asia. And Japanese Prime Minister was put in a very difficult position, same as South Korean president. And for U.S. allies with the second Trump administration, since the inauguration, they were really trying hard to figure out where to go in terms of how to deal with President Trump. There's tariffs issue that they struggle with, but in terms of military defense capacity, most of these countries, Japan in particular, are going in the direction of expanding the military capacity, which seems somewhat inevitable and necessary. And then this happens, and international law and the international liberal order is in shambles, it seems. So what is your advice for countries, especially allies in the region, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines? What is your advice based on what happened on January 3rd going forward, especially in dealing with China's ambitions to expand further?
Well, we have the grim reality in the world now of three very dangerous political leaders sitting atop the three most powerful militaries in the world, no longer just Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, but Donald Trump as well. You'll note that after Russian rage and Chinese ambition, the third element of the subtitle of my book was American complacency, which I was talking about with respect to Trump's creeping authoritarianism in the United States. This book was written during Trump's first term. I wouldn't use complacency anymore as the most significant noun to describe the democratic problem with regard to the United States. It's a much more dangerous form of arrogance and instability and danger that Donald Trump, I think, represents. And for the leaderships of our allies in Japan, Korea, I think I can say Taiwan, the Philippines, Australia, and so on, they're really on the horns of a dilemma. They know they're dealing with a mentally unstable, hubristic, imperialistic, narcissistic, and unstable, unpredictable man who has to be humored and managed in order to preserve these increasingly tenuous and unpredictable alliances, which are very precious to our common future. So it requires a lot of restraint rhetorically to avoid saying the blunt things I just said, and a lot of indirection and suggestion and oblique references to the kinds of concerns that they legitimately have. And my advice to the leaderships in all these countries is the advice I have given to my Ukrainian friends and my Venezuelan friends. Unfortunately, you can't say what you really think about Trump. You have to humor him. You have to smile. You have to be deferential. You have to be polite. But then find a way to get to the fundamental interests you need to pursue, defend, and preserve. And in the case of East Asia, that has to be number one, above all else, the preservation of our alliances including the Japan-US alliance. And number two, which actually will serve to strengthen the alliance, increasing investment in autonomous national defense capabilities, which will both show Trump a deeper commitment to the alliance because he wants to see money on the table, but also hedge against the potential disappointment that the U.S. might show under Trump if there's a crisis and Trump doesn't rise to the occasion. I think people need to hedge their bets. And hedging a bet doesn't mean conceding to China. It means finding new ways and new energy to show strength, resilience, conviction, and deterrence.
I want to close with a couple of questions. We shouldn't be engaging in predictions too much, but I can't help but ask you to pose two questions. You can choose one of them to answer just to make it somewhat easier for you. Number one, President Trump and President Xi are scheduled to meet, I think, 4 times this year, 2026. And a lot of people in Asia, people in Japan in particular, are worried about some kind of G2 deal that would put Japan in or South Korea also in great jeopardy of being kind of marginalized by those two giants. Do you think it's likely to go that way between those two leaders, or it could go things could go in a completely opposite direction as well? So which way is it going? That's number one. Number two, a lot of people are wondering what happens after President Trump steps down. Well, I'm assuming he will. J.D. Vance or whoever else might take over Republican Party, a Democratic Party might take over, return to power. But whichever it goes, what's happening this year and then in the next couple of years, how would that change or stay for the next president of the United States?
So, political scientists, sociologists, political sociologists, we're very good at predicting the past.
Yes.
And we're not very good at predicting the future. So let me just say, in the realm of looking toward the future, that when you look at the shocking combination of this sudden, powerful military intervention in Venezuela, and then the almost immediate betrayal of the democratic opposition in Venezuela by saying, Maria Corina Machado, she has no respect, will work with, the interim president of Venezuela, who's deeply implicated in the authoritarian corruption and human rights abuses of the regime. It means, I think, every one of our Asian allies and partners must know in their bones that Trump is unpredictable, cynical, selfish, and does not have any strong convictions. And except his, commitment to his own selfish interests and what he construes in a very narrow sense to be America first. So you have to allow for the possibility, if you're trying to predict, of this kind of shock and betrayal on the Asian geopolitical canvas. That said, I don't think there is broad sentiment within the senior leadership of the Trump administration for some kind of sellout of Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and so on. I think there's recognition that China is a peer competitor, a threat to our economic and national security and to world peace. And so I think there will be a desire to manage that relationship and keep it on a stable track that doesn't lead to conflict. But in terms of what it counsels for the political leaderships in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, Australia, I think the most important thing I could say to our allies is precisely because this is a president who does not have firm convictions and frequently seems to be influenced by the last person he talked to. It takes constant, energetic, proactive, imaginative, relentless, and in some ways deferential working of the relationship, including the personal relationship between these leaders and Donald Trump. If you put things on autopilot, they're going to go in an unfortunate direction. So I won't make a prediction. I'll just say that the future will be better if the leaderships of these countries internalize that fundamental lesson about Trump and the ways in which he might go. In terms of the political direction in the United States, Kiyo, I feel much more confident of making this prediction. I think all signs are pointing in this direction. The Republicans are going to suffer massive political losses in the midterm congressional elections this November. And they might buffer those losses somewhat if the Supreme Court overturns the Voting Rights Act in the United States early enough in the next few months to enable a number of southern states to redistrict their congressional districts in a way that might give the Republicans another 10 seats. But that won't be enough to save the Republican majority in the House. There's tremendous dissatisfaction with the state of the economy on virtually every issue. We know from polling late in 2025, Trump is underwater on immigration, on the economy, on foreign policy, and so on healthcare. And so I think these numbers generally presage a political debacle for the sitting president because of the political geography of the Senate races, where there are relatively few Republican seats from swing states that are up for grabs, but more Democratic seats that are up for grabs in the Senate from swing states. I think it will be extremely difficult for the Democrats to win the Senate. But I think they're very, very likely to win the House of Representatives. That means they will take control of all of the committees in the House of Representatives a year from now. The Foreign Affairs Committee, the Defense Committee, the Committee on Public Health and so on, and the House Oversight Committee, which is capable of, holding hearings and conducting investigations. So I expect that there will be more restraint of presidential power in the final 2 years and a lot of contentiousness resulting from House investigations.
That's interesting. That's encouraging to hear. Well, thank you for sharing your excellent, insightful, and very comprehensive analysis of the situation and its implications, the situation in Venezuela and its implications in the Indo-Pacific region. This was Larry Diamond. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time.